If you like your true crime podcasts with real investigative journalism, you'll love Unravel. Unravel is the ABC podcast that investigates a new case each season. It's won podcast awards, journalism awards, and it's had millions of downloads. Unravel will have your headphones glued to your ears. Search for the Unravel podcast now for award-winning true crime. You can find it on the ABC Listen app.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Lying to police, pressuring a witness, and a covert recording about burning evidence. These are the allegations against TV star Matt Wright. I'm ABC court reporter Olivana Lathouris.
And I'm Stephen Stockwell. This is the case of the Croc Wrangler.
He's one of the territory's biggest stars.
Flashing cameras and waiting reporters as Netflix star Matt Wright fronted court.
The territory tourism operator is facing 3 counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice.
This was a tragic event that took the life of the crocodile egg collector.
Mr. Wright strenuously denies any wrongdoing.
In this episode, we're going to take you through the case for and against Matt Wright, the Croc Wrangler charged with 3 counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice following a helicopter crash in 2022.
That's right, Stocky. There is so much to unpack with this case.
Totally. And before we start pulling this case apart, can you just give us an idea, Ollie, of where you're going to take us today?
So I'm going to be taking you through the prosecution opening, which is essentially a roadmap to the prosecution's case against Matt Wright. And that includes things like what happened at the scene of that accident back in February 2022. It includes a bit of foreshadowing about covert recordings taken from inside Matt Wright's home, conversations that he had with the pilot just days after the crash when he was still in hospital. And then the defence gets the same opportunity. They get to do a bit of an opening speech to the jury. That one's a lot shorter, but I'll be taking you through both. And this is such a high-profile case here in the Northern Territory, so we'll be talking a little bit about how that's being managed here.
As you've kind of just foreshadowed for us, Ollie, this is a pretty incredible case. There's so many interesting twists and turns. And I'm really keen to have you unpack the first stages of this trial for us, Ollie. But before we do that, I mean, you've talked about how this is such a kind of high-profile case. I mean, how has it captured the attention of Darwin?
Yeah, I'm a court reporter here in the Northern Territory. So basically my job consists of sitting in courtrooms like all day, every day. And let me tell you, in the Northern Territory, sometimes that is a very lonely job. It's just me up the back of a courtroom being sort of a fly on the wall and observing cases, and I don't really bump into any other media or anything like that. This is not like that. It's very unusual here in Darwin to see press packs or lots of cameras and things like that. But there's been a lot of interstate media here. You get to court in the morning and there's just sort of like this crowd of reporters and cameras all waiting for people to come into court. So that's certainly an unusual thing. And yeah, we've seen lots of members of the public kind of coming to court. There's plenty of interest. You go to the cafe in the morning and it's front page of the local newspaper. So the news is sort of filtering out everywhere into the community, and certainly there's plenty of conversation happening about it, from people in the local community here.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really just sort of captured the imagination of the top end. And I think one of the interesting things about this case, Ollie, is the close relationships of everyone who is involved in it. I mean, these are all people that have worked together. It's dealing with really heavy topics. I mean, a man has died as part of this. Another man is now paralysed. He's in a wheelchair. You're doing long days in court. I imagine, sitting there, this must all be like quite emotional.
It is, Stocky. I think there's a tendency when there are high-profile cases, I'll be honest, particularly as a reporter, we get sucked up in sensational stories and big stories. It's our job to be curious and interested in these high-profile cases. But at the end of the day, a man, a father, a husband has lost his life. Another person has been left paraplegic with a brain injury in a wheelchair. It's heavy content matter. And like you said, the people in this case are very connected. They have close friendships and relationships. There are family members from both sides in the courtroom, and there have been plenty of emotions thus far because it's a tragic story and it's a tragic case, and so emotions certainly running very high.
We've only just had the case built out in front of us, started to be spelt out. And that's what we're going to do in this episode. We kind of like present, the prosecution and the defence kind of opening statements in this trial. And this is how, trials almost always work, right? We have a prosecution barrister. In this case, we have Jason Galacci, SC. He'll lay out the case of the prosecution. And then we have a defence barrister as well. In this case, that is David Edwardson, KC, working for Matt Wright, representing him. They take it in turn to kind of present the big statements of what they're going. And we start with the prosecution. Ollie, can you take us through kind of how Jason Galacci SC kind of spelt out this case?
Yeah, so Jason Galacci essentially went through a number of points. He went through background facts of the case. He went through some things that we need to know about the scene and the day of the accident. And then he sort of broke down one by one each of these counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice. So count 1 is allegations that Matt Wright lied to police about how much fuel he thought was in the tank of that crash chopper. Count 2 is about a visit that he made to Sebastian Robinson, the injured pilot, in hospital just days after the accident, and allegations that he tried to convince him to fabricate chopper records. And count 3 is based on these covert recordings taken from inside Matt Wright's home, where he allegedly talks to a witness about wanting to have important documents related to this case and the crash chopper torched or burnt. And so those are sort of the 3 individual counts. And Jason Galacci says that the motive for Matt Wright allegedly going and doing these things is that there was stuff going on in his business and in the aviation industry that he wanted to cover up. So things like the switching off of flight meters in his choppers or the under-recording of flight hours by his pilots. And that is something that both sides accept happened, but Jason Galacci and the prosecution say that is the reason why Matt Wright went and then allegedly did these things. He was worried that investigators were going to find out about it, and so he tried to get in the way of the investigation. And of course, Matt Wright absolutely categorically denies those allegations.
Yeah, and it was kind of incredible hearing through Jason Galacci SC's opening kind of some of the evidence that we're going to hear a bit later in this case. I mean, we're talking, secret recordings, a bugged house, lots of pretty wild stuff that was going to come up.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that in this trial. So, tapped phone calls between Matt Wright and various different witnesses. Of course, the recordings that come from inside his home. There's a recording that comes from, as I was talking about, that second charge, that conversation between Matt Wright and the pilot Sebastian Robinson in hospital. We're even expecting to hear a covert recording of that, of parts of that conversation. So, lots of secret recordings that will certainly be a big part of the evidence that we're going to be hearing over the course of the next few weeks.
I'm incredibly interested as this case unfolds to hear about the process of, how these recordings were acquired. I mean, that's not something at the moment we have the detail of, so we can't dive into it. But I think there's going to be some really interesting moments later in this trial as we start to learn more about what is in these various exhibits that are going to be presented to the jury. I mean, something I found really interesting, Ollie, in the opening statements from the prosecution was, Jason Galacci SC is presenting a case against Matt Wright. And then, he's talking about, allegations of all the things that a lot of people have done wrong, in the aftermath of this fatal chopper accident in 2022. But as he's doing that, he's talking about how the work that these men are doing was quite brave and how Matt Wright and these other people going to the site in the first instance was also quite brave. It seemed at odds with each other, but I guess what they're doing is really strange, this crocodile egg collecting, right?
Yeah, Stocky, I guess, what you see in the movies is these prosecutors who are like yelling across the room and pointing fingers at the other side. And to be honest, that's just not always how court is. It's just because Jason Galacci is a prosecutor doesn't mean that every single thing is going to be argued. And like I said, there's a lot of this case that is agreed. And Jason Galacci was very upfront during his opening by saying that what these men were doing was incredibly brave. Objectively, it's dangerous, scary stuff. I mean, I certainly would not be volunteering to be hung on a 100-foot line and dropped into a crocodile nest. I would not be able to handle that. So I think it's just objectively scary and objectively, a pretty wild thing to be doing. And Jason Galachi said, yep, what these men were doing was brave. And yeah, I guess it can be a little bit jarring at first to hear that. But there's lots of things, as I said, that are agreed in this case, and that's certainly one of them.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to hear more about what was happening at the time of this chopper crash, jump into the episode we've got introducing the case of the Croc Wrangler. It talks about what these men were doing when they were collecting crocodile eggs in remote Arnhem Land. I mean, you've got one of them hanging underneath a helicopter on a rope, being dropped onto a croc nest to gather eggs before flying away, and that's when this accident was happening, during a mission like that. And I mean, yeah, it's just this kind of acknowledgement that it is, dangerous work. And I think the other thing that's interesting, Ollie, in this case is, you have Galachi as well kind of acknowledging that, we're going to talk a lot about this helicopter crash, but this helicopter crash isn't actually what this is about. It's about the aftermath. It's about what Matt Wright did following the helicopter crash that is where this investigation and where this trial is based in.
Yeah, that's an important point because, Matt Wright isn't alleged to have caused this accident. It's not about whether he was responsible for the death of Chris Wilson or the injuries suffered by Sebastian Robinson. It's really about what happened afterward. But of course, the charges still hinge on allegations that he was trying to get in the way of the investigation into the crash. So the crash itself, what happened in the lead up to it, what happened on the day at the scene, is still an extremely integral part of this trial and this case, and certainly something that both sides will be spending plenty of time on. But it is an important, I guess, distinction that the crash itself is not what Matt Wright is on trial for. Yeah, totally. And I mean, talking about the crash, and again, there's this tension, right? Like, this isn't what the trial's about, but we keep hearing so much about it. Jason Galachi, kind of introducing the helicopter at the centre of this crash, VHIDW is its registration number. And he even points out, like, you're going to hear a lot about this helicopter. We're going to refer to it as IDW. And it sounded to me like it would almost become, a character in and of itself in the courtroom in this trial, because a huge amount of the opening was taken up talking about this helicopter, IDW, the discussion of the number of flight hours that it had done. And I now consider myself like a bit of an expert in a Hobbs meter, which I never thought I'd learn about. Stocky, if you think you're an expert now, just you wait. There's going to be so much helicopter chat in this trial, and obviously they're very complex machines. So certainly wouldn't pretend to be some sort of expert after a couple of weeks. But there is a lot of discussion about the mechanics of a chopper. Things like, as you said, Hobbs meters, which are a bit like an odometer on a car. They track how long a chopper has been airborne. Jason Galachi actually had quite a funny moment during his opening where he was trying to explain to the jury what a Hobbs meter is and what it does. And he got the tissue box off his desk and he put his arm out and he said, what the Hobbs meter does is it tracks how long the helicopter has been up in the air. So not just how long it's flying around. And he literally lifted the tissue box just off his arm to demonstrate when the flight meter is sort of engaged, or the Hobbs meter is engaged. And you could just see all the journalists like looking very carefully to see this very technical demonstration of what a Hobbs meter does. So yeah, a lot of discussion about that. And again, it is an important point that Matt Wright is also not on trial for breaches of civil aviation laws, but that doesn't mean that that's not a very integral part of what this case is about. And throughout his opening, Jason Galachi did keep going back to this idea that the things that were going on with disconnecting of Hobbs meters and messing about with pilot logbooks and maintenance releases is sort of the motive, if you like, for what Matt Wright is alleged to have done in terms of getting in the way of this investigation. Of course, Matt Wright denies all of those allegations.
Yeah, he does. And going back to the Hobbs meter and the flight hours, as I was learning about, as you say, way more than I ever thought I would about a Robinson R44 is this the service intervals, right? So, them needing this major service at 2,200 hours, and that being potentially the reason that you see the tampering with these devices across the aviation industry generally, because as Gallacci said in his opening, that's a really expensive process. It's like almost $500,000 to refurb one of these helicopters, which is, potentially a pretty good reason to, for someone who's, working on slim margins to kind of underreport slightly, right?
Yeah, definitely. These machines, these helicopters are, they're Matt Wright's business. And the allegation by the prosecution is that they were trying to keep them up in the air for as long as possible. And the best way to do that, to prolong the life of the chopper, is to reduce the number of hours it looks like it's been up in the air. And that way you can keep them up for as long as you possibly can. And that's really sort of at the crux of this. And that's what the prosecution says is the motivation for Matt Wright allegedly getting in the way of that crash investigation.
Yeah, Ollie, this is a bit of a side to what we're doing here, but all through the trial of Aaron Patterson when we were doing Mushroom Case Daily, there was never a motive presented. So just for my own personal, benefit, I appreciate having a motive because, as a bit of a storyteller, it's nice to kind of frame these sort of things. So I appreciate the work of, Jason Gallacci, SC, to give us that. Obviously, that's just the theory from the prosecution. That's not a sort of confirmed thing at this stage. Matt Wright, as you mentioned, is pleading not guilty to all of these charges. And we heard as well from his lawyer, his barrister, David Edwardson, KC. As you've alluded to, Ollie, Jason Gallacci, SC, prosecutor, real long run up into his opening statements. David Edwardson, KC, really felt like he just kind of whipped through it and summed it up in a way that I may have appreciated slightly earlier.
Yes, I think at the start of his opening, David Edwardson said to the jury something like, "You'll be pleased to know I'm only going to be talking for about 20 minutes, which is a bit of a cheeky comment. But also the defence can only actually speak for a certain amount of time. So it's not as though prosecutors and defence lawyers can just talk about whatever they want in the opening. There is actually rules about what they can talk about, how they introduce evidence and all of that kind of thing. So the defence is limited in the Northern Territory about how much they can say at this point of the trial. So really he just had a much, if you like, actually simpler job than what the prosecutor had to do. Like I said, it's not David Edwardson's or Matt Wright's job to defend the case. It's the prosecution's job to prove it. But, he sort of gave this really nice little nutshell summing up of what the prosecution's case was. He sort of went through counts 1, 2 and 3 and said, well, that's just, if you like, in a nutshell, what the charges are about. And that was certainly very appreciated, I think, from everybody in the court after hearing from the prosecution for quite some time, this very detailed opening.
Yeah, no shade on Jason Gallacci, SC, but I did feel like it wasn't until I got to David Edwardson, KC, that I really kind of wrapped my head around what the individual charges were. Because, he really simplified it, didn't he? He sort of nailed down 1, 2, 3, this is what they are.
Yeah, the prosecution does have to flesh it out in much more detail, and there is only so much simplifying of these things that you can do. But David Edwardson did sort of just say, he said, count 1 against my client is that he lied on a statutory declaration to cops. Count 2 is that he encouraged Sebastian Robinson, the pilot, to fabricate his chopper records. Count 3 was these allegations that he instructed a different witness to destroy a maintenance release. And he said, that's the nutshell. So it was just this very tight summing up at the beginning of his opening. Yeah,
it was really simple. And again, very much appreciated from where I'm sitting. And, Ollie, did we get much of an idea? We know the defence opening is only quite short, but, do you get an idea from that about how they plan on kind of fighting those charges, how they plan on challenging the evidence that's going to be presented?
Yeah, like I said, there's, they are a little bit sort of hamstrung in how much they can say at this point. But certainly one of the things that David Edwardson sort of spoke a little bit about and alluded to was the poor quality of some of these covert recordings. And like I said, charge 3 really rests on these recordings that were taken from inside Matt Wright's home. Even Jason Gallacci in his opening, said to the jury, I'll admit, the recordings aren't great. David Edwardson really said that, these recorded phone calls are a very poor quality. And the other thing that he spoke about a little bit was sort of casting a bit of doubt on the reliability of some of the evidence that witnesses will be giving over the coming weeks. He said that, some of these witnesses and their evidence should be seriously in doubt. And one of those people is Sebastian Robinson, the pilot who was injured in that crash, and is certainly going to be a key witness in this case. So he sort of planted that seed, if you like, in that brief opening that he gave to the jury.
Yeah, David Edwardson, KC, rolling straight out by throwing shade on other people involved. It's going to be really interesting seeing how this unfolds. And I mean, Ollie, as we spoke about at the start of this episode, Matt Wright, this is a man who's been on a couple of TV shows. He's incredibly well known in the Northern Territory. This is a guy who's previously had a shop in the main street of Darwin. And kind of both the prosecution and defence acknowledging how well known this bloke is as they're going through their openings as well.
Yeah, and this was something that David Edwardson really sort of hammered home during his opening. He was very clear with the jury, saying Matt Wright is not on trial for breaching civil aviation laws. He's not on trial for causing the crash or the death of his friend. He is on trial for attempting to pervert the course of justice in a very specific way. And he drew attention to what he said were these ill-informed and scandalous, were the words that he used, views that have been presented in the public, social media and the like. And he said that, the jury really needed to cast those things out of their mind if they had seen them, and to totally ignore the commentary going on around this case. It can't be ignored that there is going to be attention on it. And he just said that there are two sides to every coin, and that every person deserves, a fair trial and a jury that is not going to be swayed or biased because they've consumed possibly incorrect information.
Yeah.
And that was actually something that Galachi mentioned in his opening, and which I actually thought was really an interesting point. He talked about tall poppy syndrome. And, he sort of said, for better or for worse in this country, we as a nation or as a people tend to cut successful people down. And there's no doubt that Matt Wright is a very successful person. He had this two hit television series. He had a very successful tourism business, and he specifically said tall poppy syndrome has no place in this court. And that was something that then Matt Wright's lawyer, David Edwardson, did echo during his opening as well.
Yeah, right. And I mean, Ollie, you're talking a lot here about the jury. Again, high-profile case, huge number of witnesses. Was it hard to find, the people to sit in the jury box who didn't have a relationship to any of these people, didn't know any of these people?
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting process. There was a call out for hundreds of people to, getting called up to their duty to sit on the jury. About 107 people rocked up on the day of the jury impanelment, 107 potential jurors for this trial. And the prosecution then reads a list of potential witnesses that could be called, just to give the potential jurors a heads up about who could be involved in this matter. And that's because they don't want people sitting on the jury that have connections with people or know people, things that could make them biased or could sway their opinions one way or another. And then he sort of said, all right, before we start calling jury numbers to select the jury, would anyone like an opportunity to be excused from this jury? And it was like this huge rising up of half the room, and they formed this long snaking queue around the courtroom to then be able to go up and say why they think they should be excused from jury duty. And there were many, many reasons, a myriad of reasons why people couldn't be on the jury. There was actually a surprising number of people who had Euro summer planned. Obviously, this trial comes in the middle of, the European summer period. It's a long trial, and plenty of people were like, I'm flying to France next week. Like, I don't have time for this. And if they've already paid for their flights, the judge very kindly said, all right, well, there's nothing we can do about that. You'll have to be excused. So there were quite a few holidayers. But of course, there were lots of people who knew Matt Wright, who had worked for him before, who knew his lawyers, who knew business people, who knew the victim, Chris Wilson, who knew Sebastian Robinson. It's these are people that are high profile in the community, have big businesses and have worked with lots of people, and trying to find 12 jurors in a small town is not an easy task.
I don't want to give people in Darwin a reality check here, but I feel like winter in Darwin is not too dissimilar from a summer in France. And from someone who is, at the moment, living through a Melbourne winter, I've got some thoughts that I would like to express to those people. Ollie, I want to get us to some questions very shortly, but before I do, any indication on whether or not Matt Wright is going to be giving evidence in this trial?
No, that's something that we'll have to stay tuned about. There is no indication of whether or not he will be taking the stand at this stage.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you very much, Ollie. Now, one of the wonderful parts of the Case Of is the community that we build around the podcast. And we do that with an email address, thecaseof@abc.net.au, where people can send us questions that they would like answered on the pod. And despite this email address being, at this point, less than a week old, it has already been peppered with questions and inquiries from our audience. And I want to take us through some here, Ollie, put them to you so you can take us through. I want to start with one from Alice, who is emailing from a beach in the Galapagos Islands.
Oh, jealous.
I know. Alice says, "Hi, really enjoyed the Mushroom Case Daily, and I'm looking forward to the new series as my family and I travel through South America over the next few months. My question is, was the croc egg collection that was being undertaken at the time of the crash an illegal activity in itself?"
Alice, great question, and very happy to clarify. I was worried I wasn't going to be able to answer these, but I can answer that one. No, it was not, and that was something that came up in openings. There was nothing illegal about what those pilots and those egg collectors were doing on that day. It was perfectly above board business, like we talked about in our introductory episode. This was something that it's a lucrative business in the NT. They had permission to be there, and there was nothing wrong or illegal about what they were doing.
Yeah, flying out, grabbing the crocodile eggs, taking them back to a croc farm somewhere so they can grow up to become handbags and crocodile skin boots, which is something I'm sure we will end up discussing more of during the course of this pod, Ollie. Got another question for you from Georgia. Georgia says, "Hey, Ollie and Stocky, really looking forward to learning more about this industry and this case. As someone who's never lived in one of the territories before, I'm curious if there are different ways that cases are investigated, funded, prosecuted and tried in the NT compared to other states."
Georgia, thanks so much for your question. I am not a lawyer, but, I can say that there are lots of differences, between different jurisdictions about how cases are run. There's lots of laws around criminal law practice and the different roles and rules that different lawyers have to follow. So there are certainly differences. And again, that comes down to investigation as well and how the different police powers that are given to investigators about how they investigate cases would certainly differ between jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Don't quiz me on the various jurisdictions. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I can definitely say that, there are certainly differences, and hopefully we'll be able to flesh a few of those out for you over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Georgia, we're not going to bore you with a legal lecture right now, but as we go, we'll explain different bits and pieces. Something that stood out to me, at least from the very beginning of this, is, the jury book that's given to the jurors in this trial. When we were covering the trial of Aaron Patterson with Mushroom Case Daily, the jurors had iPads, so already a little difference there, and we'll highlight other things as we go, obviously a very minor one. Final question here from Sophie, who is 12, from Ivanhoe. Sophie says, "Hi, Rachel, Stocky and team. Can't wait for the new pod. I love the way you guys presented in such an informative way. My question is, will you continue to do updates on the Aaron Patterson trial, like when we receive important info about the case? Will you make an episode covering that?" Ollie, I'll take this one if you don't mind.
I couldn't take any credit for the mushroom case, so please take the floor.
Sophie, we will absolutely bring you updates when there's news in the Aaron Patterson trial, like we did on Friday when we talked through all of the evidence that we couldn't talk talk about during the trial, or sorry, some of the things we couldn't talk about during the trial after a suppression was lifted, and then had another episode Friday afternoon around Aaron Patterson's record of interview and a few other little bits and pieces. If you've got any questions, please do get in touch. Email thecaseof@abc.net.au. We love hearing from you. It's a really nice part of this podcast is the community that builds around it, so please get in touch. Also, don't forget to jump on the ABC Listen app. It is super. It is the best way to get your episodes of The Case Of. Ollie, what is coming up next?
So, Stocky, on the next episode, we're going to be hearing from the people who were at the scene of that crash in February of 2022, and that includes one of Australia's biggest crocodile farmers, Mick Burns, and also an off-duty police officer who went out there in his thongs, and we'll explain why that happened on the next episode when it drops into your feed on Thursday.
That's right. Make sure you've wrapped your ears around the ABC Listen app so you're one of the first people to find that. We'll be back in your feed on Thursday.
The Case Of is produced by ABC Audio Studios and ABC News. It's presented by me, Olivana Lathouris, and Stephen Stockwell.
Our executive producer is Claire Rawlinson, and many thanks to our true crime colleagues, commissioning executive producer Tim Roxburgh and development producer Alicia Bridges, who did a heap of work getting us set for this trial. This episode was produced on the land of the Larrakia and Wurundjeri people.
Hi, I'm Sam Hawley, host of ABC News Daily. It's a podcast explaining one big news story affecting your world in just 15 minutes. From ABC investigations to politics, the cost of living, to major global events. Expert guests and journalists join me to explain why the world works the way it does. Follow the ABC News Daily podcast on the ABC Listen app.